Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Lamothe with the Washington Post. In the second half of this podcast, you heard Ralph emerge as a two-time war hero, 2 different battles, and you saw Frank really begin to struggle after coming home with alcoholism and a variety of other problems after seeing combat himself. Ultimately, John emerges as a figure later in the war on Tinian. Once again, the voices you've been hearing reading these letters are modern-day veterans. We invited them to join us because so many of the themes you hear here are universal, and because of that, you're going to hear those same voice actors describe their own experiences and how they relate to them. Again, with us we have...
My name is Michael Ball. I joined the Marine Corps as a Korean linguist in 1989, and I retired as a medic from the Air Force in 2013 as a Master Sergeant. I am reading the voice of Ralph in this story.
My name is Zachary Burgart. I'm a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps, still active, and I've been serving since 2004 as a reconnaissance Marine, and I'm reading the role of Frank.
My name is Jeff Chiang, and I read the role of John. I was a Navy pilot, was stationed in Japan, and deployed on the USS Kitty Hawk all over the Pacific.
My name is Brendan Wentz. I play the role of Sanford in the letters. I was in the Army from 2005 to 2014.
You have one more character that you haven't heard from yet, but soon will. She is...
I'm Rachel Zeigler. I retired from the Air Force after 27 years as a Chief Master Sergeant. 1 deployment to Iraq, multiple tours overseas. And I'm reading for Edith.
One of the key themes when we look at the second half of this story is sort of the diverging paths that you see when you see Frank and you see Ralph, the 2 brothers that see combat and really go in very different directions. I was interested in what you guys saw there, what it maybe made you think of, in your experiences, in your service, and really just what relates and what doesn't.
It's interesting to see that so much is the same from generation to generation, the things that people deal with in war. I spent better part of the last 10 years of my service transporting wounded out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've made a career after the military of helping veterans, so I'm still working with them all the time. And you see some people that have been through horrific trauma, and they seem, on the surface at least, to be okay. Other people never went anywhere near combat, and they have severe post-traumatic stress.
Well, for me, I actually haven't been in my job for the last year and a half to close to 2 years. I've actually been at the National Intrepid Center of Excellence for TBI clinic for multiple concussions, as well as some PTSD stuff. And so reading the letters that Frank had about, I'm still in the hospital, don't let me go, I could relate to a lot. And it was very interesting to see the differences and also some similarities. Yeah, I mean, in the same sense that Frank had it, guys go from hero to zero real quick, and it's rough to deal with sometimes. Like, we had a lot of guys get out of the military, less than a month after intense fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan, and the transition is not always easy, and you don't even know what's going on in that guy's head or if his mental aspect has shifted back to being a civilian, non-fighting person.
Yeah, I think these letters bring up the aspect of reintegration, and it's not always combat experiences that, change people or make them suffer from post-traumatic stress or depression or other, mental health issues. It's trying to fit back into where they may have come from, and it can trigger other undealt with emotions. I've had my own personal struggles in transition, and I've looked to some of my friends or peers, and they've it seems like they successfully threw things behind them and moved on and became very successful. And so it makes you wonder, well, why can't I do that? But then when you see letters like this, it's unfortunate, but it's also comforting at the same time to know, like, it happens with veterans of every war.
One thing that I've seen specific to that is technology hurts us in that aspect, because you can take a plane from combat zone to California sun in 14 hours, whereas World War II, they took boats back, they sailed back, and it took a month. And it's easier to decompress with people who've been there in that situation with you, platoon mates, other people. And reading these letters, maybe that's why Frank had a rough time, is because when he got injured, he got taken out of those guys right away and went back to the States, never having meeting up with his, comrades, of other Marines that he fought with. And so, you think back to World War I, World War II, they sail back and they get that decompressed time with each other. And that's huge, And one thing in World War I that they did was, if you see, back in military paintings and renderings of battles in World War I, they would depict emblems, EGAs, Eagle Globe and Anchors painted on helmets or stuck on helmets. That actually wasn't done in the war at all. That was done on the way back to dress up their helmets for the parades. And I think that alone was like taking this helmet, that protected you, turning it into a piece of flair almost, and going back and for a parade, definitely helps more than getting on an airplane, flying to, in my case, going from Iraq to Okinawa. It was raining. It was night. There was not a greeting party. And my buddy who got injured, 70% of his body got burned on the deployment. He came back out and put a $10,000 bar tab down, and we just got smashed, and went back to the barracks. And that was our little decompress time. And, within 2 weeks, we had guys completely out of the Marine Corps back home in Kansas and Louisiana, and, all kinds of places. We didn't have a great decompress time, is what it felt like.
Mike, you read some really hard letters here at playing the role of Ralph, Kwajalein Island or Ratu, or some of his frustrations. I mean, some of these letters almost seem a little angry when he's describing what he saw.
I seem a little angry. Well, I think he probably was angry. I'd be angry if people were shooting at me. In fact, I was. A lot of what you see over there does make you angry. I don't remember fear over there so much as the times I do remember feeling anger. For me, it was more anger at not being able to provide whatever it was that the patient needed. I never had an American soldier or Marine die while I was taking care of them, but I did have Iraqi and Afghan soldiers and civilians die while I was trying to take care of them, and children. And that, thinking back now, that's probably the most angry that I ever was during any of my deployments, was when trying to take care of a child that was burned from head to toe, and trying to get some airlift to get her out of, it was Baghdad at the very beginning of the war, and just nobody showed up to get her, and she ended up dying. I was just angry and disgusted with that.
Brendan, reading the role of Sanford here, you see Sanford, to a degree, become Frank's main touchstone, the guy that maybe still tries to understand. I feel like anybody who's spent some time in a combat zone probably has somebody that they open up to and other people that they shut down with. What did you see when you were looking at what Sanford was trying to do when you were reading the letters that were part of your role?
Yeah, he was trying to understand, and part of trying to do so was, remaining objective with them, talking the way they've always talked as brothers, as opposed to, well, you came back a certain way and now you're this warrior veteran, or you're damaged or whatever. He seemed to maintain the status quo with their relationship, but not in a negative way, just talk to him as a person. And I think that's sort of a very important part with, helping people return from some of these experiences, is knowing that they don't want to be treated as a certain type. They just want to be treated as who they are.
There's a letter that Sanford wrote that kind of stuck with me, where Frank is recently back. He's in the hospital, I think in Indiana, and Sanford tries to reassure him, and hey, when you get out, we can hang out, and if you wanna, we'll have a lemonade, and I'll probably be in the sunlight because I work in a factory and I don't see much sun. But if you want to be in the shade, that's cool too. And it just kind of struck me as like somehow he got it in a way that maybe other people didn't.
Absolutely, and it is ironic since he is the one that didn't deploy, and in reading letters, we know that he himself was maybe not quite what people would call normal, just in some of his mannerisms and behaviors. But again, ironically, he's the one that seems to see when people are struggling with something emotional that they can't quite articulate to other people.
As we're looking through this, all of the brothers talk about their excitement about transitioning. I recall at one point John suggesting to Ralph that they should start a sporting goods store. Just really not quite being sure what to do, but wanting to do something and wanting to have a plan. What has your experiences been with transitioning?
I retired in November of 2013, and it kind of came up a little quick after a back surgery. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I wanted to continue to work with veterans, and I've been fortunate enough that I've been allowed to do that over the last few years. And now I'm the director of a nonprofit that works for veterans. And so I see people going through this transition stress all the time. And I honestly don't believe that there is another portion of the population that goes through this type of a transition, that goes away for a significant portion of their lives and then comes back and has to reintegrate into civilian life and civilian society, whether or not they were in combat. I think it's very difficult, and it's there's a lot of focus on post-traumatic stress now, but I think transition stress affects almost 100% of the military population and their families as well. So that is a big part of what I do, is trying to help veterans that are in transition, help them find employment and find their way, find out what they want to do after they get out. I think a lot of people have unrealistic expectations. They don't have the certifications that they need to work in a civilian career field, even if they have been doing something similar. So finding ways to be able to get transitioning military men and women the certifications that they need or the training that they need to get employment in the civilian world is a big part of what I do. But transition stress is real, and I don't think it's not something that makes the news. It's not as big a headline as post-traumatic stress or combat stress, but it affects, I think, the vast majority of the military population and their families.
So I'm getting my degree. I'm 2 classes shy of my degree for criminal justice and homeland security because my goal was, do 20 years as a reconnaissance Marine and get out and be a sheriff, because as a reconnaissance Marine, as a free fall jump master, dive soup, or breacher or sniper, I have 0 marketable skills to the civilian populace, But what I have found is my 7 deployments and, 13 short years have really given me like an artistic view of the world. I found this out earlier this year, and I'm going to be going to art school next fall. I'm just finding that these like heavy themes that run through civilian world and through military, grief, loss, or, abandonment, or, all kinds of these, things that are really hard to verbalize and vocalize. I'm finding success in conveying them through poetry and ceramics or concrete or charcoal and painting. And for me, the military and the Marine Corps turned in to be my marketable skill in just giving me some of these, sometimes hellacious experiences.
Yeah, I feel like when people transition out, there's just not a lot of people that really get to use their creative side. And in fact, that's actually how I got involved in this project. It was through an organization that that really brings out the creative side in veterans. But I kind of feel like maybe society emphasizes the technical skills that we might get in the military, whether it's, electronics, aviation, computers, planes, ships, whatever. I mean, those are nice technical skills, but, some people don't want to do that anymore. I've had enough of it. And I find that kind of interesting too.
I have to completely agree. There's a certain level of conformity when you're in the military, and you're really not allowed to be. I mean, you can be creative, maybe on the job, depending on what you're doing, but you can't really let your true personality shine through sometimes because there's a certain level of expectation that you have to be a certain way, and so turning to the arts is a great way to kind of just find out who you are again. Especially if you've been in that environment for so long, you've kind of lost a little bit of yourself. So turning to creative art or acting or songwriting or just really anything creative kind of helps you almost like recenter and find yourself all over again.
We've really got time for probably one more question. One thing I wanted to hit on, because I think it was something that resonated with me and it made me think of my own family and what I was missing. There are so many families that I think don't really know what their grandparents, great uncles, great grandparents, even their fathers and mothers really did in the military. And, it's a good example of like how these stories kind of get away from us. Maybe you got a shoebox of medals somewhere, but, what did they really do? What was that experience really like? What do you guys know about your own families in terms of their past service?
It's interesting. We were just talking about this before this interview. My grandfather's name was Ralph, and he was in World War II. He was ground crew on bombers in England, and he didn't talk much about the war, at least, or maybe I didn't listen. Maybe I was very young at the time. He died many years ago, and I didn't have the opportunity. And now, looking back at that, I wish I knew more. I wish I knew where he was stationed and what he did and what, Jeff asked me what type of bombers he worked on, and I don't know. I wish I did. I wish I knew more about him and what his service record was. So, if anything, I would tell people, if you have that member of your family, your mother or father or grandparent that has that experience, talk to them now. You try to learn about that, because when they're gone, you're going to wish that you knew about that you had asked.
Did this whole experience and what you're seeing here made you think about how you might share your own experiences with people in your family? Because the flip side of this coin is you all served, and someday somebody's probably going to say, hey, I wonder what Uncle so-and-so did, or something like that.
I like what is it? The Library of Congress now has that new veterans project where they're taking veteran stories, and I'd love to share my story. I'll share it with anybody that's interested. But if a lot of times I think civilians don't ask, or your family doesn't ask, especially if they think it was traumatic. So that can be a barrier too. You don't just want to start talking about your military experience to people that didn't really ask to hear about it. So,
absolutely. I mean, I think I've tried a couple times to sort of express it to some of my family members, and it can get mixed responses that make you feel like, well, I might not bother again, based on the reaction. And at the same time, though, most of us don't want to be the cranky guy telling war stories that people have heard a million times. I'll probably end up being that for my kids when they're older, and maybe if they end up joining the military, and I'll say how much more trying or difficult my experiences were, and but I'll try to make sure it's in jest and fun.
I've got 4 boys. And I've done a lot of cool things in the military. I've got some neat pictures and cool tabs and stuff. Whenever I think about my boys joining the military, I always think about the Merle Haggard or Waylon Jennings song where it's let them be doctors and lawyers and such. You know, like that's the way I feel about it. I don't want boys to join the military. I feel like it was great and honorable and did a lot of cool stuff, but you know, it came with a lot of baggage and ruined a lot of relationships. Been in too many funerals and you know, physical strain. You know, I'm 31 years old. I'm going through medical retirement because my shoulders don't work and, you know, can't remember things. I've got migraines that leave me completely debilitated. You know, I don't wish that upon my 4 sweet little boys, you know. So I don't have those same feelings that some people have where they think about telling stories to their son and comparing stories or listening to how it was for them. Like, I don't want them to join the military at all.
You know, I come from a military family. My dad was in the Air Force. He did 20 years. He flew F-4s, did a couple tours in Vietnam. I was in the Air Force. My son is in the Marines. So my dad talks about his stories. It took him a while before he started talking about the things that he did. And so now when he talks, I listen. I'm a little more closed when it comes to my stories. I'm learning how to tell my stories, but there are still some things I'm like, I don't know that I can tell you my stories. So I tell the funny stories when I can remember them. And so to get my son to talk about his experiences, he's done a couple deployments on ship out in the Pacific. So I want to hear about those because that's not something that I would experience in the Air Force. So getting him to open up has been a challenge too. So
I think it's important that people hear, though, 60 years ago, almost that entire generation was either involved in that war or had a family member that was involved in that war. Almost the entirety of the country was affected. Now we have wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that have been going on for 15 years now, and still a very small percentage of the population. Just several percent of the population has actually served in the military. There are a lot of families, a lot of people that don't have a relative or don't even know anybody who was in the military and don't know what that experience was like and can't relate. So I think it's important that those stories are told, so that, you know, this vast majority of the population that never experienced that knows, does not forget what war is like and what war does to people.
That's actually probably a really good spot to leave a discussion like this off. Thanks again, everyone, for participating and sharing your own thoughts and experiences. That's not always easy. So I appreciate that, and I'm sure all the listeners are going to appreciate that as well. Stay tuned, everyone, for the conclusion to this story, where we learn how the Eyde brothers fared in the aftermath of the war and the many, many years beyond that. Don't forget, if you're interested in reading more about the Eydes, we have a ton of pictures of the family and all of these letters online. You can see them at WashingtonPost.com/lettersfromwar. I'm Dan Lamothe with the Washington Post. Thanks very much.